My name is Jacob Harris. I'm 42 years old, a duty engineer for one of the biggest energy companies in the Mid-Atlantic. I work rotating shifts, days, nights, holidays, whatever keeps the grid running. It's not glamorous, but it's stable, solid, like the life I thought I had. For the past 11 years, I've been married to Mallory. She's in marketing, sharp, driven, great at remembering birthdays and networking small talk. We met at a friend's 4th of July cookout in Richmond, bonded over burnt hot dogs and a mutual hatred for karaoke. 2 years later, we were married. We bought a modest house in the suburbs of Virginia, adopted a cat named Luna, planted a cherry tree in the backyard, and made a routine out of Sunday morning omelets and weekend road trips to the coast. To most people, our life would have looked peaceful, predictable, normal. But normal doesn't fracture in an instant. It erodes quietly over time. The morning everything changed, I had left the plant early. No emergency, just a lull in the system load and a generous supervisor who owed me a favor. I thought I'd use the extra hours to pick up Mallory's favorite croissants and surprise her at home before she headed out for her Friday meetings. Felt like a sweet, spontaneous thing to do. And maybe, in hindsight, that was the last time I felt good about anything between us. I pulled into our driveway around 6:40 a.m., parking beside her car. The sun hadn't fully come up yet, casting a bluish haze over the neighborhood. Our porch light flickered like it always did before finally giving in. The front door creaked when I opened it, the same familiar groan I'd heard for years. Everything looked normal, quiet. Then I stepped inside. And I knew. It wasn't just instinct, it was something real. The air carried a scent that didn't belong. A cologne, foreign and heavy. I'd never worn anything like it. Mallory usually hated strong fragrances, said they gave her migraines. But this wasn't some DR** store spray. It was layered, expensive, bold. Notes of cedar, maybe vetiver. Sharp enough to slice through the faint traces of our usual home smell. Cat litter, cinnamon from the plug-in diffuser, detergent. I closed the door behind me and stood still, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just the distant hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock above the mantel. I walked quietly through the hall. My boots felt too loud on the hardwood. The living room was untouched. Pillows fluffed. A throw blanket folded just so on the couch. Her mug was in the sink. The same blue ceramic one she always used for peppermint tea. Beside it, a half-eaten protein bar. Then I reached the bedroom. The door was open just a crack. Enough to see that the bed was unmade. Our white duvet rumpled, pillows tossed aside like someone had left in a hurry. One of them had been flipped over, the corner stained faintly with what looked like makeup. Not Mallory's usual shade. On the armchair in the corner, her pencil skirt was draped carelessly over the back, still holding its shape like it had been slipped off in a rush. And right beside it, hung neatly, too neatly, was a man's blazer. Navy blue. Slim cut. Tailored. I'd never seen it before. My chest tightened, but my hands stayed still. No shaking. No panic. Just a cold, rising stillness. The kind that fills the air before a storm. I didn't touch anything. Didn't call out her name. I just stood there, staring at that blazer. Mallory wasn't home. The car was in the driveway, so she must have gone for a walk, or maybe someone had picked her up. The silence in the house felt unnatural, like it was waiting for me to react. I sat on the edge of the bed. The sheets were still warm. That detail did something to me. It wasn't just what I was seeing. It was the confirmation. I wasn't catching a suspicion. I was walking into the aftermath of something that had already happened. Something int****. Something deliberate. I don't know how long I sat there. Frozen. Maybe a minute. Maybe 10. Then the front door slammed. I heard heels on the tile. Jake! Mallory's voice echoed down the hallway. You home already? She didn't sound surprised, not really. Maybe mildly curious, like she'd run into me at the grocery store, not walked in on the edge of a collapse. Her tone was light, casual. Too casual. She appeared in the doorway seconds later. Her hair was pulled back, still damp like she'd just showered. She had a reusable coffee cup in one hand and her phone in the other. No sign of alarm on her face. If she noticed me sitting on the bed, if she saw the jacket, the skirt, the mess of sheets, she didn't react. I didn't say anything, just looked at her. She blinked once, then smiled. I thought you weren't off until 8. I stood up slowly. Got done early. She nodded. Oh, that's nice. Then her eyes flicked to the chair. Pause barely a second. That's Eric's, she said, pointing to the jacket. Eric? A coworker, she continued quickly. We had to finish the pitch deck for the investor call. He came by late last night. We worked on it here. He must have forgotten his jacket. I said nothing. He was only here for an hour or so, she added, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Left just after midnight. I kept my expression blank. The truth was, I didn't care about the jacket anymore. Could have had his name stitched on the inside and I wouldn't have asked. What got me wasn't the item, it was how smooth the delivery was. Her voice was composed, her explanation rehearsed. There wasn't a hint of defensiveness or panic. No flinching. Just a clean, neat narrative, handed to me like a well-folded note. I wasn't ready to accuse her. I wasn't even sure what words I would have used. But I knew. I could see it in the way she avoided eye contact, in the practiced way she said his name, Eric, not a friend, not a colleague, like she'd thought it through in advance. Like she'd decided that if I came home early, this would be the script. I walked past her, down the hall, into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady, my breath even, but something inside me had changed, like hearing the first crack in the hull of a ship you thought was watertight. She didn't follow me. She stayed in the bedroom for a few minutes, then came out and started tidying. Like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just stumbled into a version of my life I didn't recognize. Want breakfast? She called out. No, I said quietly. I sat at the table, staring out the window at the backyard. The cherry tree was shedding leaves. A few had blown against the fence. Our cat rubbed against my leg, purring, unaware of the shift in atmosphere. Mallory made herself a smoothie, hummed a little, talked about how stressful next week's meetings would be. I listened, nodded occasionally, said little, and that was the beginning of the end. Not a fight, not a confession, just a quiet, perfect lie, delivered with the ease of someone who'd had practice. Enough truth to sound convincing, enough detachment to keep from shaking. I realized then that our marriage hadn't broken in that moment. It had already been breaking slowly, invisibly. That morning was just the first time I could see it for what it was. A hairline fracture running through the center of something I thought was solid. And once you see the crack, you can't unsee it. After that morning, nothing looked the same anymore. Not our house, not my wife, not even my own reflection. You tell yourself to move on after moments like that, to rationalize, to take your partner at their word. But once doubt settles into your mind, it doesn't leave. It just learns how to hide better. It sits there, quietly rearranging everything you thought was ordinary. I tried. God knows I did. I kept telling myself Mallory was right, that I was being paranoid, tired, overworked. I even repeated her explanation aloud when no one was around. A coworker, late night, presentation prep. But no matter how I phrased it, it sounded hollow, like an excuse meant for someone too polite to ask follow-up questions. That week, she started guarding her phone. It was small at first, just little things I wouldn't have noticed before. She'd keep it face down at dinner, leave the room to take calls, change her lock screen picture to something generic, a photo of the ocean. Her passcode, which used to be the date of our anniversary, suddenly didn't work when I tried to play music one evening. She laughed it off, said she had to update her security settings for work. I didn't laugh with her. That was the week I stopped sleeping properly. I'd get home from night shifts and lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her breathing beside me. Every small movement, every sigh, every buzz from her phone, it all felt amplified. There was a rhythm to her deception, and I was starting to learn the beat. The change wasn't just at home either. It followed me into work like static clinging to my clothes. 3 days after that morning, my supervisor, Dennis, called me into his office. He was an older guy, fair but firm, not one for gossip. When I walked in, he looked uncomfortable, which immediately set me on edge. "Jake," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "This is awkward, but I need to ask, everything all right at home?" I frowned. "Why?" He hesitated, eyes darting to a folder on his desk. "We've had some concerns raised. Nothing serious, but—" He trailed off. "Apparently, your wife called the plant yesterday. Said you'd been, her words, not mine, emotionally unstable lately." Took me a second to process. "She what?" He grimaced. "She told HR you've been having outbursts, forgetting tasks, that she was worried the long shifts were getting to you." I just stared at him. "Dennis, you've seen my logs. I haven't missed a single check-in." "I know that," he said quickly. "Your record's spotless." I told them it didn't line up with what I've seen. But, well, they had to make a note of it. You understand. I nodded numbly. My mouth had gone dry. When I left his office, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was the realization that Mallory wasn't just lying. She was building something, preparing, laying groundwork for when the truth came out. It was a defense before I'd even accused her. That night, she cooked dinner, chicken piccata, my favorite. She poured wine, lit candles, played soft music from her phone. She smiled and asked about work like nothing had happened. I answered carefully, each word measured, while my mind replayed Dennis's voice. She said you've been unstable. When I finally mentioned it, her fork froze midair. For a fraction of a second, her mask slipped. "Oh," she said softly. "You talked to Dennis." "Yeah," I replied. "He said you called HR." She sighed, put her fork down, and reached across the table. "Jake, listen. I only said something because I was worried. You've been tense lately, distant. I didn't mean for it to sound like that." Her eyes met mine, steady, clear, practiced. "I just thought if your boss knew, maybe they'd cut you some slack. You're overworking yourself." It was a good line, almost believable. But there was one problem: Mallory never meddled with my job. She prided herself on keeping our lives separate. The fact that she had called my workplace at all told me something bigger was happening. It wasn't concern. It was strategy. That was when the fear began to change shape. It wasn't just the fear of betrayal anymore. It was the fear of being rewritten, of having my version of reality replaced by hers. Piece by piece. In the following days, I started noticing patterns. The same silver SUV parked 2 houses down from ours every few evenings. Sometimes it was there in the morning too, condensation still clinging to the windshield. I'd never seen who drove it. Same tinted windows, same spot, engine always cold when I passed by on my way to work. Once or twice, I thought about knocking on the neighbor's door to ask if it belonged to them. But I didn't. Part of me didn't want confirmation, because deep down I already knew. She started going on business trips more often after that. Not the kind with plane tickets or expense reports, just overnight strategy sessions with her marketing team. Always on weekends, always with vague details. I'd ask where they were staying, and she'd smile and say, "Oh, some Marriott near the conference center, I think." The kind of answer meant to end a conversation, not start one. The first few times I tried to call her hotel room. She never picked up. Later she claimed bad reception. Then she stopped giving me hotel names altogether. Even our cat Luna seemed to pick up on the tension. She'd hide under the couch when we argued, if you could call our new quiet, clipped exchanges arguments. Mallory began leaving the house before dawn and returning late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. Not the vanilla blend she'd worn for years. Something bolder. Something that didn't fit the woman I thought I knew. The distance between us grew like rust. At night, she'd scroll through her phone, smiling faintly at messages I wasn't allowed to see. When I asked who it was, she'd laugh and say, "Just work, work." It became her alibi for everything. One evening, I decided to test a theory. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered. It buzzed once, twice. A text preview flashed for half a second before the screen locked again. The message was from a number I didn't recognize. No name attached. Just a single line that made my stomach drop. Can't wait for next time. You looked incredible today. By the time she came downstairs, the phone was gone, and her expression was unreadable. I said nothing. Neither did she. But we both knew I'd seen it. After that, her behavior changed again. She wasn't defensive. She was careful. She started wearing neutral scents, deleting messages, pretending not to notice when I came home unexpectedly. And every time I tried to bring up what I'd seen, she'd twist it, subtly, expertly, until I ended up questioning myself. "Jake," she'd say softly, "you've been working so hard. Maybe you're just imagining things. You said you've barely been sleeping." It was a clever move, turning concern into control. The same tactic she'd used with Dennis. That was when I began keeping notes. Every date, every lie, every inconsistency went into a small notebook I hid inside the boiler room at work. Not out of paranoia, out of self-preservation. I wasn't sure what Mallory's endgame was yet, but one thing was certain. She was rewriting our story, and she wanted to make sure when the truth came out, I'd look like the unreliable narrator. But I wasn't losing my mind. I was watching it happen in real time. The way she smiled differently at her phone, the way her tone softened when she talked to colleagues, the way she started calling me Han, again like a peace offering designed to distract me from what she was really doing. And through it all, that silver SUV kept appearing. Always there. Always empty. Always waiting. By the end of the month, I stopped wondering if I was being paranoid. I knew I wasn't. I just didn't know how much of my life she'd already taken apart before I noticed. A week later, Mallory told me she was heading out of town for the weekend. Another strategic marketing summit. This time in Charlottesville. She said it so casually, pouring her coffee like she wasn't rehearsing every word. She always left early on these weekends, before sunrise, like she was trying to outrun the daylight. I sat at the table in silence as she zipped her bag. She kissed the top of my head like always, like she hadn't spent the last month lying to my face. "I'll be back Sunday night," she said. "Don't forget to water the basil." Then she was gone. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. When I was sure she wasn't coming back for something she forgot, I grabbed my keys and followed. It wasn't hard. I knew how she drove, how she avoided toll roads, how she always stopped for gas before merging onto the highway. I stayed 3 cars behind, slow enough not to draw attention, but close enough to follow the scent of deceit. She didn't head toward Charlottesville. Instead, she took a back road through the countryside and turned off onto Route 42. Nowhere near the conference center, she claimed. The farther she drove, the more obvious it became that this wasn't business. Just outside of town, she pulled into the gravel lot of a small boutique hotel I'd never noticed before. Hidden behind trees, no signs, no neon. One of those places built to be discreet. The silver SUV was already parked out front. She got out of the car slowly, glancing around, not like someone nervous about being caught, but like someone used to not being seen. I stayed back, parked behind a line of hedges across the street. And then I saw him. He stepped out from behind the hotel's entrance like he'd been waiting for her. Tall, well-dressed, navy suit again. The same guy I'd seen months earlier on her company's team page. The one with the plastic smile and polished LinkedIn profile. She used to call him Ryan from Strategy. Always with a slight eye roll, like he annoyed her. Apparently, he didn't annoy her that much. He reached for her hand without hesitation, and she let him. They stood there, fingers intertwined, talking in low tones. She laughed. An easy, familiar kind of laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in months. The sound was light, relaxed, real. She leaned into him like she had done it before, like her body already knew the shape of his. They kissed once. Nothing dramatic, just a small, practiced kiss. Like two people who weren't falling in love anymore, just continuing it. I didn't take pictures. I didn't need to. There are things you see once that change the way the air feels in your lungs. This was one of them. She looked happy. That's what broke me. Not the betrayal, not the physical proof that she was cheating. It was the way she smiled with him. The way she leaned her head against his shoulder. The way she exhaled like her body was finally allowed to relax. She hadn't looked at me like that in years. They walked into the hotel arm in arm and didn't look back. They disappeared behind sliding glass doors, and I sat in my car staring at the empty space where she had stood. The sun filtered through the trees and danced across my windshield. It should have been a beautiful day. I don't remember how long I sat there. Long enough for the coffee in my thermos to go cold. Long enough for the stillness inside me to harden into something I couldn't name. I didn't follow them inside. What would have been the point? I didn't need a confrontation. I didn't need an explanation. I already had the truth. No lies, no denials, no gaslighting. Just a cold, honest truth, delivered without a single word. She was gone. Even if her things were still in our house. Even if her name was still on the mail. Even if she came home Sunday night pretending nothing had happened. She had already left me. Emotionally, physically, completely. And what hurt most was how easy it had been for her. No mess, no guilt, no struggle. Just a clean transition from one life to another. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove. I didn't have a destination. I just followed the road until the buildings disappeared and the trees swallowed the sky. At some point, I pulled into a gas station to get water. I remember the cashier asking, "You okay, man?" I lied. I nodded and left. By the time evening came, I had crossed into another county. I found a roadside motel that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Flickering sign, parking lot full of trucks, a clerk who barely looked up when I asked for a room. The walls smelled like stale cigarettes and the shower leaked. But I didn't care. It was far enough. That night, I opened my work tablet and started writing. Not an email, not a message, just a document, a timeline, a journal. I wrote everything I'd noticed in the last 3 months. Every inconsistency, every change in tone, every lie dressed as an excuse. I wrote about the jacket, the phone passcode, the late-night meetings, the call to my supervisor. I wrote until my hand ached and my eyes burned. It wasn't anger that drove me. It was the need to remember, to record, to prove to myself I hadn't imagined it. The longer I wrote, the calmer I became. The truth didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to be seen. My phone buzzed just after midnight. Her name on the screen. First a call, then a text. "Hey, are you okay? I just got to the hotel. Call me when you can." Then another. "You left the garage door open again, by the way." And then, "Miss you already." I stared at the messages like they belonged to someone else's life. The version of Mallory who sent them, the warm, teasing, domestic version, wasn't real. Not anymore. Maybe she hadn't been real in a long time. She was just a character she played when she came home. A mask she wore until Monday. I didn't reply. I didn't block her either. I just let the silence settle. Felt better than I expected. I woke up the next morning with the sun slicing through the broken blinds. The motel bed creaked beneath me as I sat up, groggy but clear-headed. There was no rage, no dramatic spiral, just clarity. I showered, dressed, and checked out before 8 a.m. I drove in the opposite direction of home for a while. Stopped at a diner, had pancakes, listened to 2 old men argue about football like the world was still simple. That afternoon, I pulled over in a public park and sat on a bench for an hour. Watched strangers walk their dogs. Watched kids chase soccer balls. Watched lives move forward. Then I finally drove home. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. She hadn't left the porch light on. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and found everything pristine. Like she'd spent the entire morning scrubbing the guilt out of the floors. The air smelled like lemons and bleach. The photos on the walls were dusted. A candle flickered in the kitchen. Mallory was sitting on the couch in yoga pants, hair up in a messy bun, reading a book. She looked up like nothing had happened. "There you are," she said. "You disappeared on me." "I needed air," I replied. "You didn't answer your phone." "I know." She studied me for a moment. I waited for her to ask more questions, But she didn't. She just nodded and went back to her book. No guilt. No nervous fidgeting. She didn't even ask where I'd gone. That night, she made dinner. Stir-fry and jasmine rice. We ate in silence. She talked about her meetings, how productive they were, how tired she was. She didn't notice I didn't look at her once. Or maybe she did and didn't care. When she went to bed, I stayed up. Sat in the living room for hours, just listening to the stillness. No television. No music. Just the quiet realization that I was living beside a stranger. And she was comfortable in it. I thought the truth would break me, but instead it brought peace. The search was over. The proof wasn't digital or spoken, it was lived. And now that I had it, I could finally decide what came next. I didn't pack a suitcase. Didn't leave a note. Didn't slam a door or say something dramatic like you see in movies. I just left. The night after she got back from the hotel. The night she served stir-fry and told me all about her team's breakthrough. I waited until she fell asleep, and then I stood in the bedroom doorway, watching her breathe. It struck me how peaceful she looked. Not in the way a partner looks when you love them, but in the way a stranger does, untouched, unreachable. I didn't recognize the woman in my bed. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed once on the nightstand. She didn't stir. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't need to. At 2:11 a.m., I grabbed my car keys, wallet, work boots, and left the house without turning on a single light. I wasn't running. I just knew I couldn't exist inside that space anymore. Not without suffocating. I drove for hours. Through neighborhoods I didn't know, past gas stations, closed diners, and empty parking lots. I wasn't crying. Wasn't raging. I was just flat. Like my mind had gone offline to conserve power. Around sunrise, I found a roadside motel just past the state line, tucked between a hardware store and a broken-down drive-in theater. The sign flickered half-lit. Vacancy. I paid in cash. The man at the desk didn't ask questions. Just slid me a key attached to one of those giant plastic fobs with a faded room number. 6. The room smelled like damp carpet and old cigarettes. A single lamp flickered next to the bed, and the wallpaper peeled near the window. But it was quiet. And more importantly, no one knew I was there. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened the same notebook I'd been keeping at work, and started writing. Not just about Mallory anymore. About me. I wrote what I was feeling, every raw, clumsy sentence. How numb I was. How ashamed. How strange it felt to be grieving a marriage that hadn't technically ended, at least not in the legal sense. But emotionally, we were already buried. I stayed in that motel for 3 days. I turned my phone off the first night and didn't turn it back on until the third afternoon. When I did, there were 11 missed calls from Mallory, 6 voicemails, a string of texts. Jake, where are you? I woke up and you were gone. Please call me. I'm worried. This isn't like you. What's going on? Please just say something. Jake. The messages started panicked, then softened, then grew cold. I could see her unraveling with each one. But I didn't answer, because by that point it wasn't about answers anymore. She knew. I knew. We just hadn't said it out loud yet. Instead, I opened a new note in my phone and wrote something else. A list. At the top I wrote, "What's left?" Under it, my job, my name, my health, my integrity, my knowledge of the truth. Then under that, what no longer matters? The house, her explanations, the photos on the wall, the plans we made, the version of me that let this happen quietly. I didn't make grand declarations in that motel room. No epiphanies, no dramatic turning points, just slow, steady clarity. I called in sick to work. First time in years. Dennis didn't question it, just told me to take the time I needed. On the third night, I stood outside the motel room under a buzzing floodlight and stared up at the blank sky. No stars, just clouds. I thought about the first road trip Mallory and I ever took. Up to Shenandoah, the overlook where we sat in silence, the way she held my hand so tightly I lost feeling in my fingers. I remembered believing we were strong then. I wondered if she ever felt it too, or if she was always just acting. On the fourth morning, I finally went home. The house was spotless when I walked in. Not lived in clean but staged clean, like she was trying to erase the week. A candle burned in the kitchen. The cat's water bowl was refilled. Laundry folded on the couch. A roast was in the crock pot. Our wedding photo had been moved from the hallway to the entry table. She was trying to write a new scene before I could write the ending. She came out of the bathroom when she heard the door. "Jake," she said. Her voice was light but nervous. "You're home." I nodded, walked past her, and went straight to the bedroom. She followed. "Where were you?" I didn't answer. "Why didn't you call?" I opened the closet, pulled out a duffel bag, and started packing. She stepped forward, panic rising. "Wait, please. Just talk to me." Still, I said nothing. What was there to say? The silence between us was no longer a threat. It was a verdict. She tried again. "Jake, if you're upset about something, we can fix this. Just talk to me. You're scaring me." I zipped the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and turned to face her. She looked pale, hollow, not angry, not defensive, just lost. That was the moment I realized something. She wasn't in control anymore. Not of me, not of the story. She was reacting now, chasing the version of herself that used to manage everything with charm and poise. The woman who could outtalk guilt and outmaneuver consequence. I walked past her, down the hallway, and into the garage. I grabbed my toolbox and a bin of work clothes. She stood at the door watching me. "Where are you going?" she asked quietly. "I don't know yet. You can't just leave." But I could. And I did. That night, I checked into a short-term rental above an old auto shop on the edge of town. It smelled like oil and dust and machinery, and it felt real. No marble countertops. No candlelight dinner setups. Just raw space. I texted my supervisor and told him I'd be back Monday. He offered to connect me with an employee assistance counselor. I said I'd think about it. I didn't tell anyone else where I was, not even my brother. I needed space where no one could rewrite my thoughts while I was still thinking them. The next morning I ran. Just down the block at first, then farther. My lungs burned. My legs ached. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't walking in circles through someone else's life. Each step took me farther from the man who'd let things slide, the one who waited too long to believe his instincts. I stopped at a bench near the river, sweat dripping, breath ragged, and I smiled for no one. I was alone, but I wasn't erased. I was surviving, quietly, deliberately, and Mallory, she could fill the house with clean sheets and casseroles and voicemail apologies. She could retell the story as many ways as she wanted. But I wasn't in it anymore. I had walked off the page. When I came back, the house looked cleaner than it ever had. It was 3 days after I left. I didn't call, didn't warn her. I just pulled into the driveway late in the afternoon and sat there for a long minute with the engine off, staring through the windshield. From the outside, everything looked the same. Fresh mulch in the flower beds, porch swept, even the damn wind chimes gently swaying in the breeze. But something was off. The place didn't breathe anymore. Felt like a show set. All the props in place, all the lines rehearsed. A version of our life that looked right from a distance but was hollow inside. I walked up the steps slowly. The door was unlocked. She was in the kitchen. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Lemons and lavender, with a faint undercurrent of something burnt, like a candle that had been left too long. She had music playing low, something instrumental, the kind of playlist people put on when they're trying to seem calm. She turned when she heard the door, and for the first time in months, she didn't smile. Her face was bare. No makeup. Her eyes were rimmed red. She wore an old sweatshirt I hadn't seen in years, sleeves pulled over her hands, like she'd shrunk into herself. "Jake," she said. I nodded once, didn't speak. She stepped around the kitchen island slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "I didn't know if you were coming back." "I came for my things," I said. She flinched. That was the first crack. There were bags under her eyes. Her lips were dry. Her hair was tied up messily, not in the artful way she usually did. Just tied. Functional. I looked around. Everything was staged. The table was set for two. Napkins folded. Wine glasses polished. Dinner already simmering. Something creamy with garlic. A playlist of soft jazz looping in the background. "You were expecting someone?" I asked, not hiding the edge in my voice. Her lips parted, then closed again. She glanced at the table, suddenly embarrassed. "I thought, maybe if you came home we could talk. Sit down." "I'm not here for dinner." She nodded and rubbed her wrist, a nervous habit I hadn't seen in a long time. "Can we still talk?" she asked. I hesitated, then shrugged. "You can say what you want. I mean really talk, without yelling, without walls." There was no anger in her voice, just something raw and fraying. She wasn't composed this time, wasn't guiding the conversation with perfectly placed phrases. She looked like someone who had spent 3 days trying to rehearse an apology and couldn't find the words. I didn't sit. She did, perched at the edge of a chair like she didn't trust it to hold her full weight. "I didn't know what to do when you left," she said softly. "I kept checking your location, but your phone was off. I thought maybe something had happened to you." I gave her a look. I thought maybe you got into an accident. Or just snapped." There it was again. That soft implication that I was the unstable one. I didn't bite. "You lied to me," I said. "I know." Repeatedly. "I know. You cheated." Her jaw clenched. Her eyes glistened, but still she didn't cry. "Yes. With Ryan." She nodded. "It wasn't planned. It just—" "Don't," I cut in. "Don't tell me it just happened." She looked down. "You're right." The room was so quiet I could hear the timer on the oven ticking. "I'm not here to scream at you," I said. "But I want you to understand something." She looked up slowly. "I saw you." Her breath caught. "I followed you that weekend. I saw the hotel, the SUV. I saw you with him. The way you laughed. The way you looked at him." Her hand trembled slightly. She folded it into her lap. "I didn't interrupt. I didn't confront you. I didn't need to," I continued, "because in that moment, everything became clear. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't unstable." She covered her mouth with her hand, not in shock, but in shame. "Jake," she whispered. I waited. She lowered her hand and finally said, "You're right. All of it. I lied. I made you doubt yourself. I made you think you were the problem." "And why?" I asked. "Because I didn't want to be the villain. I didn't want to admit that I'd destroyed something that was once good. That you were good." She stood slowly and walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't know when I stopped being your wife," she said, her voice quiet. "I think it started small, little lies, little moments where I checked out and didn't come back. But I didn't stop it. I let it grow. I told myself I was just tired, or bored, or going through something." "And Ryan?" I asked. She turned, leaning against the counter. "He paid attention. He asked about things I'd stopped talking about. It started with harmless dinners after work, drinks, and then one day it wasn't harmless anymore." I said nothing. "I know that doesn't justify it. Nothing does. But I want you to know it wasn't because of you." "I know that," I said. She blinked. "This wasn't about me," I continued. "You didn't cheat because I failed you. You cheated because you made a choice." She nodded slowly. "I think part of me wanted to get caught," she admitted. "Not consciously, but maybe I was tired of pretending, tired of trying to live two different lives." I looked around the kitchen, the clean dishes, the playlist, the dinner. "Are you still seeing him?" I asked. "No," she said immediately. He wanted more, and I realized I couldn't give it. I broke it off before you found out, or I thought I had. Guess I was wrong." I almost laughed. "You were already found out, Mallory. You just didn't know it yet." She sat back down, wiping at her eyes now. Still no full tears, just wetness gathering. "Do you want to save this?" she asked. I looked at her. "Us?" she clarified. "Do you want to try?" There was a time I would have said yes, without question. But that time had passed. No, I said gently. She swallowed hard, then nodded. Okay. That's when she finally broke. Her face crumpled. Not in a dramatic sobbing kind of way, but quietly, like someone folding under a weight they carried too long. I never wanted to lose you, she said through tears. But you did, I replied. Long before I left. She didn't argue. I'll stay somewhere else tonight, I said. I'll come back this weekend to finish packing. She nodded. You don't have to rush. I do. I walked to the door, but paused in the entryway. She stood there, arms crossed, trying to keep herself from shattering completely. I looked at her, really looked at her. This was the woman I married. The same one who laughed too loud at movie theaters. Who left notes in my lunchbox the first year we were married. Who once cried when I gave her a photo of our cat in a tiny sweater. And yet, she wasn't her anymore. Or maybe this was who she'd been all along, and I was only now seeing the full picture. I'm not angry, I said. She looked at me in surprise. I'm sad. I'm disappointed. I'm tired. But I'm not angry. Not anymore. She took a deep breath. That almost makes it worse. I nodded. And then I left. The air outside felt sharper than I remembered. Like the wind was cutting through layers I didn't know I had. I didn't look back. Because the house behind me wasn't home anymore. And the woman inside it? She wasn't wearing a mask anymore. She just didn't recognize herself either. A week later, I returned for the last of my things. On the table was an envelope with her handwriting. Inside, a short letter, no pleading, no drama. She admitted it started long before I noticed. Said the affair wasn't passion, just an escape. Lies were easier than facing herself. At the end, she wrote, "Love doesn't vanish. It erodes through small betrayals." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I moved into a room above an auto shop. Quiet, worn, mine. I ran in the mornings, worked late, and fixed up a motorcycle that didn't need fixing. Slowly, the noise faded. She stopped calling. I didn't forgive, didn't forget. But I let go. I wasn't rebuilding the past. I was writing something new. In silence, I found peace. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel broken. I felt free.